I want to introduce to you His Excellency Mr. Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson. He is the president of the Republic of Iceland. He's the first. Are you the first Icelander to get a PhD in political science?
Yeah, that's right.
Well,
I was also the first professor of political science.
You were the first professor, and you're from my world. You were in the TV and radio world as well.
Well, I did that sort of part-time, yes, more of...
You decided you'd actually solve real problems.
Well, it was an interesting story because I was educated in Britain.
Yep.
And in the 60s, I got a sense of how BBC and the other stations were treating the media discussion in a different way. So as a young man, I came back to Iceland and started in radio and then in television, doing a similar kind of open discussion and asking the political leaders and the establishment some straightforward questions, which hadn't really been done up to then. I was also teaching at the university and doing my PhD research at the same time. So it was a very interesting time, and the media has changed, of course, a lot since then.
So if you like direct questions, I'm going to ask you, what the hell happened? It was going so well.
Well, the simple answer is that to some extent we took this whole ideological financial message that came out of the United States and Britain.
That regulation is bad.
Yes,
free markets can run everything.
That you privatize, you deregulate. The market will always be supreme. It will lead you to prosperity, and the financial institutions will be the new pillars of the 21st century economy. I mean, this was the gospel coming out of this great city. If you went down to Wall Street in the early years of this century, or even the 90s, everybody on Wall Street believed that message. So since we are in between Europe and the United States, it was not strange that this gospel also found its way to Iceland. We were unlucky in the sense that we privatized the banks at the time when the world was afloat with money. So everybody was willing to do dealings with the Icelandic banks. So in a matter of half a decade or so, they moved from being what you could call Icelandic banks in the normal sense of the word, operating in Iceland,
right,
and became, in fact, European banks. And when they collapsed, over 80% of their business was outside of Iceland. And the European financial market is organized in such a way, as you know, that you can establish a bank in one country, and then that bank can operate anywhere within the European Union. And the regulatory system is still sort of not primarily based on national regulations. Of course, we failed in terms of having a sufficient surveillance. We didn't have the sufficiently sort of rigorous control. But I sometimes say, because you mentioned 2008 and so on, that 2006, 2007, there were warning voices. There were experts and even financial representatives from other countries who were saying that the banks were too big and the situation was getting dangerous. And I listened to those voices. But then, on the other hand, I also listened to what the rating agencies were doing. And throughout that period, even up to 2008, they gave the Icelandic banks a clean bill of health, said they were in excellent conditions. I also listened to the fact that most of the European and American banks were doing business with the Icelandic banks. And I said to myself, if the rating agencies say things are okay, if the big financial community wants to do such extensive business with the Icelandic banks, I doubt whether those critical voices are in fact correct. So I made the mistake, like many others, in believing in the years leading up to this, the prevailing wisdom of the international financial world. And it was a costly experience, costly mistake for my nation, for our political system. But then, when the banks collapsed, what you saw in Iceland is, I think, a very serious warning to establish Western democracies, because Iceland is one of the most secure, stable, democratic societies you can find anywhere in the world. But within a few months, the failure of the financial system had become a fundamental threat to the stability of our democratic system. There were protests, there were riots, the police had to guard the parliament, the prime minister's office. And quite frankly, I have to tell you, once we were into January, my greatest fear from one day to another was not whether we would recover from the economic collapse. My greatest fear was what would happen the next day to our democratic society, whether that would be torn apart by this process. So, in a sense, you could say that Iceland became a laboratory demonstrating how a collapse of the financial system can fundamentally threaten a democratic society and a stable political system. And if that can happen in Iceland, then just imagine.
In a very, very stable place,
exactly.
with the happiest people in the world.
And also pretty sophisticated people, if I may say so.
Yeah.
But fortunately enough, we then came together. The government resigned. We decided on parliamentary elections. We appointed a special commission headed by a Supreme Court judge to look into the failure not only of the banks but of the political system. We established a special office of prosecutors that have been examining those who perhaps sort of broke the law. We then had referendums on whether the Icelandic people should repay the debts that the private banks had created in Britain and the Netherlands. And I think an important lesson of that is this also, of interest both to the US and Europe, that if we had not instigated such comprehensive political reform and program and judicial, as well as the economic measures, I doubt if the nation would have come together in the way it actually did. And we would have seen much serious splits or cleavages. So my advice to many of my colleagues in Europe and also here in the United States is that you have to realize that this crisis that you are still facing is also a fundamental political crisis. If you simply treat it as a financial and economic crisis, I doubt if you'll be able to deal with it in a successful way.
Did you see the movie Inside Job?
Not yet, no.
Okay, I mean, I tell everybody they should see it. I thought it was a fantastic movie. And it's probably one of the best tellings of the collapse of the financial systems around the world, but it starts with Iceland. The whole thing, in fact, I remember watching it not knowing it started with Iceland, and it was going on quite a bit about Iceland, and I was thinking, did I just get a movie about Iceland? But it definitely sets it up. I know more about Iceland than I thought I would ever know, but it definitely sets it up.
It's a great country. You should get to know more.
But it's exactly what you said, though. It's the microcosm that we all have to be careful of.
No, absolutely.
Of happening, because it was a concentrated example of what's happening elsewhere. What we saw out of Iceland was what it nearly did to these other banks. What we didn't see, what I still don't know, is what effect it has had on the economy of Iceland. What today is different as a result of this collapse?
Well, this is another very interesting story, and maybe somebody should make a movie about that.
You really should see the other one.
Yeah.
Inside Job.
And if somebody makes the movie about our recovery, you should also see that movie. Because
recoveries don't sell as well as collapses.
I know. But I'm not so sure, because now I am getting media people from Europe, from Spain, Portugal, Ireland, and others, and also here from the United States, who have realized that Iceland is now recovering in a very interesting way, that the IMF program is finished. The IMF has left Iceland. In that sense, Iceland has become an IMF success story. So now people want to know, what did you do that the other countries that were hit in Europe, and even the United States, has not done? Why is your recovery now on a good track, whereas the US and Europe deals with crisis almost from one week to another? And we did many things, of course. We devalued the currency. Secondly, we didn't pump public funds into the banks. We treated them like private companies, and we let them fail. But also, and you might find this interesting, because I don't think the media has really covered that, the Icelandic banks, like the American and the European banks, have really become high-tech companies, hiring engineers, computer scientists, mathematicians, and the kind of people that normally would go into high-tech manufacturing companies or advanced IT companies. But the banks were offering them higher salaries, bigger bonuses, and so on. So when the banks collapsed, suddenly there was a big pool of talent available to companies in the IT sector, in the high-tech manufacturing sector, in the clean energy sector. And these companies have, in fact, done an extraordinarily good business in the last 2 or 3 years. So the message is also this. Even a successful financial sector can't be bad news for the 21st century economy. Why? Because increasingly global competition between countries is based on the growth of innovation, technology, IT, manufacturing, and so on. And our major companies in that area have now, some of them doubled their workforce since the banks collapsed. Their exports have been record exports. The profits have been record profits. So I would say to the US and to Europe, you also have to realize that your financial institutions and the banks and so on are in fact being roadblocks that hinder other potential sectors of your economy. So one of the reasons why Iceland is growing, again, is the success of these many different sectors. Another reason, coming back to your previous discussion here, is that in the last 30 or 40 years, we moved the Icelandic energy economy from being, when I was a teenager, over 80% dependent on imported oil and coal. We were a carbon-based economy. Now, for the last 20 or 30 years, we have been 100% a clean energy economy for all electricity production and space heating. And that has meant that companies like Alcoa, Rio Tinto, Century Aluminum, companies in data storage and many other areas, all are either already operating in Iceland and want to increase their operation or want to come and invest. So one of the reasons why our recovery is stronger and earlier in arriving than in many other countries, including the US, is that the clean energy transformation we did in the last 20 or 30 years has turned out to be a fundamental base for our recovery, drawing foreign investment and advantages to the nation, but also enabling the people in Iceland to enjoy sort of cheap energy prices. So one of the lessons is simply this. If you want to strengthen your country with respect to potential financial crisis in the future, you should move aggressively into a clean energy economy.
There might be a movie in that.
There certainly is.
According to the IMF, your GDP growth for 2011 will be about 2.3%, increasing to about 2.9% in 2012, which is excellent. Your unemployment rate is 6.7%, and you had a long-term unemployment rate of 3%, roughly, 3.03. You topped out at about 9.3 right in the midst of this crisis. But your labor force isn't as dynamic as the labor force in the United States. So we have a 9% unemployment rate here, and I think it'll be 5 years before we bring that back down to sort of our long-term 5% full employment rate. How do you get yours down? It's double your long-term rate. Do you have enough going on at 3% growth next year to bring your unemployment rate down? That's got to be your biggest problem.
Well, depends how you look at it. If you take the area of Iceland, which is not the sort of larger Reykjavik area, but more or less the entire west and the north and the east and the south of the country, you don't see that kind of unemployment. The unemployment is primarily in the larger Reykjavik area. In addition to the banking boom, there was a big construction boom in Iceland, which would have burst anyhow. And there were a lot of people working in the construction sector. So that is not going to start again, sort of quite frankly. And we will have to move people somewhat from that sector into other areas. And I think we will hopefully be able to do that. But then again, some economists argue that if you look at our long-term record, as you referred to, then up to the early 1990s, the Icelandic economy was always dominated by high inflation. And the high inflation was perhaps one way to create low unemployment. So once the economy sort of stabilizes, as it has now, and giving how the world looks like, it's doubtful whether we can get back to long-term level as low as it was before. But then again, this year, we have had companies in many different sectors advertising again and again and again for people to come and they want to hire, without success. One high-tech manufacturing company that had about 200 people working when the banks collapsed now employs about 400 people. An internet gaming company, CCP, which produces EVE Online, if you want to check on it, has now more than doubled its workforce in Iceland after the bank's collapse. Similarly, the pharmaceutical company is building a new research and development center, hiring over 100 people. So in many of these high-tech, educated, dominated sectors, they are in fact hiring more people than they were in the previous years. So it's a paradoxical picture just to take the unemployment figure and draw negative conclusions from it.
Interesting. All right. Well, you mentioned the marketing. I remember some years ago being on the subway in New York, and there were these ads for Icelandair.
Yeah.
That remarkably low prices to go from here to European cities via Reykjavik, and I think they were even throwing in a night or two of hotel for much less money than you could generally fly directly. And I remember thinking to myself, I don't usually have the extra time to go through Reykjavik, but that would be nice. And then when this all happened, we all saw the same images on TV of Reykjavik, which looks like a remarkably beautiful place. Has this helped tourism?
You mean the ad campaign?
No, not the ad campaign. The collapse of the economy.
Oh, sure. No, we have had.
It really has been.
On a lighter note,
Yeah.
you could say we've had 3 very interesting PR campaigns for Iceland in the last 3 years. We had the financial crisis, which brought Iceland suddenly
into the world discussion. Yeah.
People like you, never took an interest in Iceland, suddenly wanted to know about Iceland. Then, about a year and a half later, or 2 years later, we got this enormous volcanic eruption. The Eyjafjallajökull eruption, which stopped air.
Do you know how to say the name of that?
Oh, of course I do. Eyjafjallajökull. It means the island mountain glacier.
What did we call it? A17 or something?
No. I think one of your CNN people gave up on this and decided to call the mountain Kevin.
Yeah, we couldn't say that.
Yeah, Kevin, yes. But that meant that all over the world, Iceland was known again.
That's correct.
And when I had a meeting with the Prime Minister of China last September, Wen Jiabao, he opened the meeting by saying, Mr. President, I want you to know that now everybody in China knows about Iceland. And then, just in order to remind people, we had this year another eruption, a sort of smaller one, but just to make a point.
That's right.
And all of these things, brought Iceland on the map. So 2009, 2010, and probably also 2011 have been our best tourism years ever.
I have no doubt.
Now we have 4 flights a day this summer between New York and Reykjavik. And we have flights to Seattle and Denver and Boston and Minneapolis and so on. And it's not just that this has put the country on the map. It is that people have now realized that Iceland has this extraordinary elements of natural beauty, wilderness, a combination of glaciers and volcanoes and valleys and rivers and lakes, where in fact the creation of the world is still going on, as we demonstrated this year and last year. And if you come from a country where almost nothing ever happens in terms of the sort of geological things, and you suddenly come to a place where the creation is still vibrant, it affects your soul in a completely different way. I sometimes lightheartedly put it this way, that if you read the book of Genesis, the opening of the Old Testament, and it describes how God created the world, we all know this, in 6 days, and then decided to rest. It's not true, because when it came to Iceland, the Almighty became so fascinated by the possibilities that the creation has continued in Iceland and is still continuing in a very effective way. So people come now flocking to Iceland, not just because of the financial crisis, because through all of this, they have discovered a country which enables you to be alone in the wilderness and to witness the creation, which you can't really do in a civilized world where you can also have a nice meal in the hotel in the afternoon, in the evening, and enjoy all the amenities of a modern society. This year, for about 4 months, the country was fully booked, literally fully booked. We could hardly have taken more people into the country. My former colleague, since you mentioned political science, hosted this summer a gathering of the European Congress of Political Scientists. There were over 2,000 political scientists that came to Iceland. The problem was you couldn't get them all into the hotels. So they had to put ads in the paper to ask private homes to take some of these political scientists in. And about 200 of those visitors had to stay in private homes because the country was literally fully booked. And our tourism sector is now doing so well that Iceland Air had record profits last year and is planning almost 20% increase sort of next year.
Well, Mr. President, what a great conversation. Glad to see that you're well on your way to recovery. His Excellency, Mr. Ólafur Grímsson, the President of the Republic of Iceland.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure, sir.
Thank you.